Hello there, my friends, or enemies, or acquaintances, or whatever position or definition you may give yourself. I wanted to talk for a moment about civil disobedience. Now, I'm a staunch supporter of the right to speak our minds, to protest what we think to be illegitimate, what we protest, to protest what we think to be harmful or dangerous. It's one of the basic human rights that we've overlooked because we consider it part of our Constitution. The reason it's in the Constitution, the right to free speech in this country, is not because it's some American exceptionalism. It's because it is a basic human fundamental right that many governments obscure, and that ours does as well, though we go under the guise that we care. Civil disobedience is the ability for the society, the community, to stand up against what they see as something that is wrong. If you want to support civil disobedience, if you want to support protesting, you have to support all forms, regardless of whether you think it is right or wrong. So, for this discussion, I'm going to be talking about No DAPL, or the Dakota Access Pipeline, which back in 2016, thousands of people stood up against this pipeline because there was not enough of an environmental impact research done on it. It was crossing many sacred lands, many waterways under rivers and lakes, which, if it leaks, and they often do, could devastate wildlife and harm the local environment. And people wanted this research to be done and have it diverted around some of these areas. Naturally, these companies wanted to profit. So during this process of, I just found this box in the garage of goggles. It was like 50 pairs of goggles I'd bought to send out to Standing Rock. And we delayed for a couple weeks and it ended, so there was basically nowhere to send it. But we looked up on the website to see what people wanted. We wanted to contribute, to help these people. Because it wasn't just Native Americans standing there saying, we want to protect our last tract of land. It was whites, it was blacks, it was Mexicans, it was all people who wanted to protect the land. It's the idea that people have, this racist idea that somehow it's just Native Americans. I'm not going to get into white guilt. I, in fact, have been I've had people biased against me because I am white, okay? I know how that feels to have people tell me that my ancestors took their land. You just got to kind of roll with it. This is a bigger issue than that. This is the environment that we live in, which is being dominated by these corporations. And you have to get nasty sometimes in order to get press coverage. In this particular case, they hadn't got very nasty. In fact, most of this was peaceful sit-ins. And the response was to send in police and military in riot gear to protect these corporations in order to detain and arrest these protesters, including journalists, many journalists, even Amy Goodman from OPB. She was charged with rioting. Eventually, out of these 800 cases, there were only 26 charges actually brought. And basically, it's not a matter of saying, well, we're going to make you pay for what you've done wrong. It's a matter of saying, we're going to shut you up by detaining your journalists. And they do this in other countries. In fact, what happened in the Middle East, they just blew up the AP, the media building in the West Bank. Talking about these issues, you just get shut up, you get censored, you can't even discuss them sometimes. It's impossible to know how to cover these things and talk about these things. But my reason for bringing up the Dakota Access Pipeline was to make sure that people are aware that this didn't go away. This isn't something that, people have just forgot about and said, oh, well. There are still people fighting what's going on. And in fact, they had to do an environmental review, then they fought against it, then they had to shut down the pipeline, then they reopened it, but they still have to do the environmental impact review. My thought is, if you're going to put an oil pipeline through my country anywhere, you damn well better have an environmental review. Because I'm an outdoorsman, and I enjoy the these outdoor spaces, and I know how badly they can be damaged. So you're goddamn right. We have a right to protest. We have a right to go out and document these things. And this is getting harder and harder to do with these men in riot gear with their faces covered, taking away your rights, arresting you. And I know a lot of people, this brings the image of Portland and what happened around the country over this last summer. And I know a lot of people, for example, on the right, cheer this. They say, yes, arrest these protesters. Look at them. They're all destroying buildings. Even though only a small percentage of these people actually were doing any damage. And I was personally involved in this, so I'm aware, because I saw someone arrested that did nothing, tackled to the ground, someone I love. And so, the whole idea that we have a right to protest has been infringed upon so horribly. And social media has been under attack the same way. They're shutting down any discussions in groups that might actually help people under the guise that it's to, stop hate speech. We have got to figure out how to talk about this because, I've seen this. There in the past, people were able to, go out and stand up for what they thought was right. Now you have to get permits to even gather in a group. This is why you always hear of they have a permit to march. The idea that you need a permit in this country to stand with a group of people for something you believe is important. Now, what happens on January 6th at the Capitol? I can't stand here and say I support it because I don't. I don't support the reasoning behind it. But do I support people's right to stand out and protest how they feel? Of course I do. And that's, I guess, what I'm getting at. If people expect us to support each other, if we want somebody to support our thoughts and what we think is important, think about a cancer march. You have a friend who died from leukemia or a friend who died from some obscure disease, and you want to speak up and make these things known and tell people about it, but nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to care about your cause except other people who were affected by it. Maybe you had bone cancer, any variety of diseases. But you know what? In the end, the only people who are going to care are the ones who generally were affected by something. And this is why there's so much division. People don't support others' right to protest or stand up for what they think is right unless it affects them directly. And they don't realize that in this whole web, everything affects you. The people who were protesting that pipeline were protecting many of the communities who were scoffing at them, saying, oh, just get out and let progress happen. Do you see oil pipelines running through rich neighborhoods above ground? It depends, I guess, on when the community became wealthy. The point being that it's the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard, but you can build it over here. Not realizing that this impacts all the waterways all the way down to the ocean. Whether it be for oil or for gold or to create a hydroelectric power plant by flooding out an entire valley, or right-of-way for freeways and highways, so destroying entire neighborhoods, or mining for some obscure element to build cell phones or cars, or even the nuclear weapons that were used in the desert in Nevada, where entire areas are uninhabitable. These are things that we've let others decide for us. We've let others choose how our land is used, instead of realizing as Americans, as citizens of this country, it's our responsibility and obligation to stand up for these things. That if you're not in support of Americans who are standing up against a potential hazard to the land, to the environment, you've been hoodwinked then. Then you're the true sheep. Then you're the ones who have actually been suckered into thinking that the corporations are far more important. The same kind of people who believe in trickle-down economics. You got to get nasty sometimes. But, especially when you've got people in riot gear spraying freezing cold water on folks in Dakota in the middle of the winter. And this was years ago. But these things happen all the time. happening right now with settlers from Israel, supposed, quote, settlers. And, people wonder why there's chaos in the Middle East. It's not just a fighting over land or holy sites. Absolutely not. It's about domination over other people and domination over land. And we all share this land, whether you like it or not. And as long as people keep trying to take it over, people are going to get nasty about it. And this is why civil disobedience is one of the best assets we have as citizens. Those are my thoughts. Peace.